Okay, thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and get started with our education and culture meeting. We have a very packed agenda, so we're going to go ahead and start promptly with our first item, which is our Office of Community Use of Public Facilities. So I'd like to invite our Executive Director of CUP, Ramona Bell Pearson, as well as Deborah Lambert with our Office of Management and Budget. I will turn it over to Vivian Yao, our legislative analyst. But let me just say a couple of things. I know that for the, I'm going to steal your line, Councilmember Jawando, for the millions that are watching at home, I just want to frame our community use of public facilities was initially designed in a way to ensure that these public buildings that we have would be able to be accessed by our community, understanding that these are resources that we need to provide access to for many people who are looking to hold meetings, to hold programs, nonprofits to provide services for our community. And so how best to structure something along those lines. And out of that came and then working with, of course, MCPS, who has a large portion of our community facilities in our communities, decided to create this entity called CUP. There have been challenges when it comes to ensuring the equity and fairness when it comes to accessing these buildings. And, you know, Ms. Bell Pearson, I know that you've inherited a lot of the challenges that come about as a result of trying to achieve that fairness and equity. And we're still working with a lot of those to try and make sure that we're where we want to be. I know that Council President Navarro has worked incredibly diligently on making sure that, especially when it comes to our community organizations that don't have a lot of money, that we try to level the playing field with them and give them access to these public facilities as well. I know that our school system continues to struggle in making sure that with the principals who are tasked with taking care of their buildings and making sure that it's in the best interest of the school as to what's there, how to balance that with the needs of the community and the priorities that parents have for what they want to see in their buildings. All of these things are not easy. And certainly it's one where it's not as if someone is doing something wrong. It's just that, as always, we're trying to figure out ways in government in which we can do them better. And so from that perspective, while I think that today is not the time for us to be talking about the radical changes that may or should happen with CUP, I think that it's something where certainly this summer we certainly need to take up this conversation and this dialogue, understanding that we do have a sunset in terms of the current regulations that will end in July. We also have a number of other concerns that remain out there about the efficacy of our program as it relates to making sure that these entities continue to be affordable for our communities as a whole. And so I just wanted to lay some of the groundwork there. I'm going to turn to Council President Navarro and then to Ms. Yao to walk us through the packet. Council President.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really appreciate that introduction. We did have a robust conversation when we met to talk about the OLO report on after-school bookings. And we did, at that time, discuss a couple of issues that I hope the executive branch is working on, mainly the amending the regulation regarding who can utilize the subsidies that we adopted through a bill that I sponsored and was passed by the entire council. It's not supposed to just be for nonprofit organizations. It's supposed to really be for, to serve communities that are low income or have certain priorities and goals. So, be tracking that issue as well as the more robust conversation about restructuring perhaps, or just truly overhauling this process so that we can have more access to our public facilities. I guess when we go through the packet, I do want to have a conversation about that particular facilities fees assistance program, because it seems like we're slated to perhaps run out, and I think it would be important to make sure that we have additional dollars there. It's not a big amount, but maybe $10,000 to $20,000 in order to make sure that organizations can access that. So that's something that I will probably be proposing as we get into that particular item, but really do appreciate your introduction.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Council President. Ms. Yao?
For fiscal year 20, the executive is recommending total expenditures of $11,959,269 for CUF. It's an increase of $39,370, or a 0.3% increase from the fiscal year 19 approved budget. Council staff just reminds the committee that the program is supported by an enterprise fund and does not receive tax dollars to support its operations. And the ICB, or the Interagency Coordinating Board, is the policymaking authority for CUF. There are no changes recommended for the number of positions, but they are recommending a slight increase of 0.2 FTEs for the program. On page 2 of your packet is the table that shows the various adjustments for the program, and on circles 1 to 2 are performance measures for the department. The first expenditure issue is reimbursements to Montgomery County Public Schools. CUF is mandated to reimburse MCPS for costs incurred and services rendered in making facilities available to the community. And so a significant portion of the CUF operating budget, 58% or $6.9 million, goes back to MCPS to reimburse them for costs. And the table on page 2 shows the various different reimbursements for fiscal year 20, as well as the trend from 18 to fiscal year 19.
So I want to stop you there, Vivian, because I want to acknowledge the presence of one of our school board members, Ms. Pat O'Neill, so thank you very much for being here. One of the things that I've been talking with Vivian about has been, again, just to understand the expenses that are associated with what happens when something is rented within our public schools. And so a greater understanding of what those charges are, and again, this isn't for today, this is for future discussion, but certainly something that I think would be helpful, is as we're trying to create a fee structure that is truly up to date and represents all of the costs incurred, I'd really like to understand more about how we calculate that and flush out that formula. If it needs to be more, it needs to be more. If it in fact is more and needs to be less, I'd like to just understand what that is and truly get a grasp of what that is to make sure that our school system's not being shorted and to make sure that we're also keeping the costs for our community in line with where they should be. So I think that would be helpful. And I see you have a recommendation for approval of those reimbursements. Is there any objection on the committee? If not, we'll move forward. All right.
Okay. So the second item is the Silver Spring Civic Building and Veterans Plaza. CUP has the primary responsibility for providing oversight and scheduling for the building. The tables on pages 3 and 4 of the packet show the operating budget support and revenue attributable to the Silver Spring Civic Building from fiscal years 18 to 20. Basically, for fiscal year 20, the executive is recommending operating costs of $1,156,785, and facility use revenues are projected at $1,011,465. In addition, $150,000 from the CUF Enterprise Fund will be transferred to the general fund to support the community access program. That budget is actually located in the community engagement cluster budget. And that is to support, again, users, provide subsidies for users. Two items related to the Silver Spring Civic Building to note are increased funding of $130,000 for audiovisual equipment installation, as well as an increase of $15,440 for security services, which are actually based on actual costs that were expended in fiscal year 18.
I see Councilmember Giwando has a slide up. Councilmember Giwando.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Vivian. I just wanted to chime in. I think obviously this building, Civic Building, gets a ton of use. The Community Access Program gets a lot of use, and it's available for folks who might not be able to pay the full fee, but have a nonprofit and other things. And I just wanted to ask our folks how have we seen that usage go up over the last several years, or has it? What are the trend lines on that? Because I think that's something just to monitor.
It's increased significantly.
Ms. Bell Pearson, if you could just introduce yourself.
I'm sorry.
No, it's all right.
Ramona Bell Pearson, Executive Director for the Community Use of Public Facilities. It has increased significantly over the years. We have gone from having festivals occasionally in the Veterans Plaza and use of the Great Hall on somewhat regular basis to now having every weekend completely booked. And that's not just small events. That's large events in the Great Hall, and that's festivals that are, close to 1 million people at times in the entire Silver Spring area. This has benefited not only our civic building, but it's also benefited the community at large because, as you know, there are quite a few vendors. There are brick and mortar as well as mobile vendors that benefit. So it's become quite a asset from a cultural standpoint as well as a county standpoint.
You made the point I wanted to illuminate, that we are getting a lot more bang for our buck with this relatively small investment in how we help people. I've seen weddings and quinceañeras, and I've seen everything happen at the Civic Center, and it is a great facility. And this is just a testament to who we are as Montgomery County, and I think it's great bang for the buck because it helps everyone around there and helps the economy, and it's a great place. And do we need? Is all this money used every year?
For the CAP program?
Yes.
It fluctuates, but we have steadily gotten to the point of using almost every penny. When we haven't, in the past couple of years, we've been able to allocate the funding to assist in building upkeep.
Right.
Because that's a significant part of maintaining the asset. If you've been there recently, we put a new flooring in, which really isn't part of the CAP money. That was funds that came out of the enterprise fund. We're in the process of upgrading the audio-visual, assuming we get support, and we are planning to do a lot more things to just maintain the facility.
Thank you very much.
So I consider myself to be an equal opportunity critic as well as supporter, and so I really want to applaud the county executive for recommending this increased funding, recognizing the need that continues to be there. This building, and I don't live in Silver Spring any longer, grew up there but don't live there any longer, but every time that I go there, just as you said, there's always something happening in practically every single room of the Civic Center, and Eric Rosh and the staff there do just an amazing job in keeping that together. But we've all experienced, in fact, with our last equity forum, we had some challenges with the audiovisual. And so from that perspective, it certainly is one where that needs to be upgraded because understanding what we see happening there and the usage that Councilmember Johanna was just talking about, all of those things, if we're going to be charging folks for it, we need to make sure that it's of quality. So kudos for recognizing this. So colleagues, without objection on the approval of the county executive's increase. Okay. Vivian, next one.
Next item is the CUP fund balance. During fiscal year 16, the fund balance was well above the policy target of 10% of total resources. And as a result, the ICB has been considering how to draw down and invest enterprise funds to enhance the community use of public facilities. It's been sensitive to ensuring that public space users are not charged more than their fair share of costs, and as a result, they've opted for a phased-in approach instead of, a larger short-term expenditure. And so the table on pages 4 and 5 of your packet shows the specific uses of the fund balance from fiscal year 18 through fiscal year 20. Council staff wanted to draw your attention to 2 items that's listed for fiscal year 20. One of them is the $613,000 contribution to the new shared agency booking system replacement CIP project. Basically, there's a need to replace the current activity registration and facility reservation software. We've heard for a number of years that it's really not doing the job that we expected it to. And so there is a new CIP project that will be reviewed by the Joint Fed and E&C Committee on May 1st. An additional $304,000 will be put into that project in the next fiscal year, fiscal year 21.
Let me turn to our lead for Parks. That may be the reason why he's here for this one, but welcome. Councilmember Freed.
Thank you, Chair Rice, for allowing me to be here. And A couple things. One is I'm looking forward to a robust conversation related to that with the joint committee, and so I won't belabor the point here. I have plenty of thoughts there, but we can take it up at that point. But I did want to say I was very disappointed and am pleased now about the $250,000 that was restored to move two parks as part of our ongoing effort as a council, which the previous council deserves a lot of credit for really making an emphasis. I think that this has received widespread support in the community, and there are lots of different feelings and strong feelings about our fields and the type of fields that we have and the equitability of those fields and what we use to build them and how we build them. But there is universal agreement, I think, that our Parks Department really does a great job of maintaining them. And I actually think we should do even more than this, but I'm not going to present that now, particularly in light of the council staff recommendation, which I think is a thoughtful one, of having a work group in the interim to look at this comprehensively and thoughtfully. My hope is as part of that effort, we are able to ramp up our investment to make this an even faster process, which is really just a question of resources for the Parks Department, of how quickly they can take care of these new fields, get them up to the standards that they have. There's an environmental imperative to do that, I believe, and I think there's certainly an equity imperative to do that in terms of the types of fields. I think that every resident particularly, but especially our young people, should have access to high-quality fields, and the more we can invest in this, the better. So I'm pleased, and I want to commend the county executive for kind of hearing some of the comments that were made, that myself and several of us made at full council when Parks was here, and have had private conversations, I know, and I appreciate the fact that he's put that in. And I was going to ask that we put even more in, but in light of the fact that council staff has the recommendation to really take a look at this in the interim, I will save my request for more funding for this for next year, but I want everybody to know that it is coming, be forewarned, 12-month warning, but I look forward to those ongoing conversations. Appreciate the opportunity to speak on it.
Well, thank you very much, Councilmember Friedson, for rolling up your sleeves right away and getting involved and engaged. Our new members who are leads are certainly doing their part in terms of making sure that they're representing their particular areas very well. And I truly appreciate that. Let me just say that when it comes to the work group, one of the other things that the council president and I were just talking about is that with the surplus that we continue to have, the question remains, and this is why, again, I think that we need to have a larger conversation, is to whether or not the fees are the right amount of fees. The question will be, well, should county government then step up and pay for ball field renovations, for the other things that we need, or do we want to rely upon the community who uses the facilities to be the bearers of that funding? And so that's something that we need to discuss and figure out from a priority standpoint. Again, not a decision point for today, but certainly is going to frame that overall conversation when it comes to ball field renovation, but also when it comes to the other investments. I mean, I think quite honestly, and Ms. Yao and I were having this conversation about my working with ActiveNet and other, I've reserved facilities at community recreation centers for birthdays and all kinds of parties, just like your other average citizen. We don't do it any kind of different way than everybody else does. And, whether it's a picnic area at the soccerplex, or whether it's a community room at the Germantown Recreation Center, we do need to invest. The system is not as good as it should be, and there are other procedures that go along with that in terms of, where we've experienced. All of us know the story about someone being in your space when you're supposed to be there, and who handles that, and how can we best manage those kinds of things to ensure that, so there's a lot to talk about in this space, a lot of work that goes on, but how we collaborate together to make that happen. But I think at the forefront is, as we approach with this equity lens, I think that, again, what we want to do is make sure that these spaces remain affordable. And so from that perspective, if we have an overage and we see that money consistently going into and funding other kinds of things, can we lower our fees? Again, not an answer for today for us to decide, but can we lower our fees and actually make it easier for folks to access some of these facilities? And so something to talk about in our larger grand scheme as we approach larger deliberation around CUF as a whole. So, Ms. Yao, are there any objections to supporting the county executive's initiative?
No.
Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you. No objections. I just had a question. I guess we are going to have the work group. We don't need to take any action. We're just going to do that, right? You know,
That's correct. That's right.
So,
May I add?
No, please, Ms. Bell Pearson.
I have been made aware just Tuesday of this week that Councilmember Albornoz has been convening the rec and the parks to have some of these discussions. And I was invited to the next meeting, which I believe is the week of the 22nd. So they are already starting to convene to discuss these things. It's a natural discussion because we're also partnered for the ActiveNet discussions. So we are starting to look at that, and we will be following up on this recommendation because obviously all three need to come together. The other point I wanted to make, sure that the council was aware, the $613,000 related to active is not just for the replacement costs associated with CUF, but it's also for rec. Because of the enterprise fund, we're doing both agencies.
Absolutely, and I applaud you for that. It makes complete sense because just as I went on ActiveNet to reserve, and well, actually, I think I had to have an ActiveNet ID, but still went through the parks to reserve the shelter. But then I also used ActiveNet to reserve my daughter's soccer camp at the Discovery Sports Complex that's in the park. So yeah, it's a little confusing. So it's great to blend them all together because you're always bouncing around between them. And so from that perspective, again, kudos to making the system and the process easier for our constituency. That's great. So without objection, we'll approve those additional transfers.
Okay.
Ms. Yao.
So for fiscal year 20, the executive is recommending or has budgeted revenues of $12,030,948. It's an increase of $413,758, or 3.5% of the fiscal year 19 approved budget. And on Circle 5, it shows the Public Services Program fiscal plan. As you'll note in that chart, the fund balance is going down, so it's trending in the right direction. So moving on to two updates. One is on the Facility Fee Assistance Program that Council President Navarro had referenced when she first had her remarks. This, again, is a fee assistance program to support use for vulnerable youth and low-income families. The CUB staff has reported that they've been doing a number of things to increase participation over fiscal year 18, and basically the descriptions on page 7 and 8 of your packet shows a number of things that they have been doing. They also report that as of March, $60,297 have been expended or awarded in subsidies, and they anticipate that the remaining amounts will be awarded through fiscal year 19.
Let me turn to Council President Navarro.
Thank you so much. So most certainly, I think, when we have the robust conversation, it would be great to also discuss this issue of, the fees and subsidies, or what is the right amount? Can we have a different process regarding that? So I'll leave that conversation for that time. So I also want to commend CUF for really doing a lot of great work to increase the use of this particular assistance program, which had not been fully utilized in the past. So I know you guys have done amazing work to get that going, and I really, enjoyed reading all the different ways that you've done that. That's really awesome. I would only suggest that social media would be really a great addition to everything that you are doing. But then, just curious about the fact that it seems like now it's quite popular, and it looks like it's slated to run out. Ms. Bill Pearson, what are your thoughts about that? And do you think that if we were able to at least add $10,000, would that, help you through until? How do you see things going right now?
I think we're hoping that the future is going to bring a combination of successes that will help us with the limited funds that we have. Changing the legislation, which has been prompted by the OLO recommendations and your strong support and recommendation, will make a difference, I hope, in terms of for-profits being involved, which will then become partnerships, which will then give us the opportunity to focus even more assets and resources on Title I, high farms, and any other qualifying area. We can always use more money in terms of the programming then becomes more available. What we're finding now, because the program's still new enough, the availability of remaining funds will satisfy the summer camp issue. But moving forward, as it becomes even more popular, then people will learn sooner that summer camps are something they need to apply for earlier. And by that time, the money will have already dwindled to a larger extent. So I can't necessarily predict how much or what it's going to look like next year or the next, but I can say that it is increasing in popularity. And we are doing some social media things. We're doing Nextdoor. We're also doing, we did a radio program, and we're doing some other outreach that is trying to get into the media aspect.
So if we were to just, so what's included is the $75,000 for FY20, is that right?
Yes, it is.
And so if we were just to adopt that, what you're saying is that, of course, that will be okay for the summer programming, because what you have left right now will help
It's
everybody
covering
kind of
it.
get ready. And then we're going to have the broader conversation. So, okay, so maybe I'll just wait, because I think it will be important to talk about the restructuring, perhaps, and how are we going to address the issue of the, fund balance, and how could that be actually instead used for something like that. And given that you seem to be okay for summer camp, which is really a concern, then I think I'll just wait and see how we end up. So I won't propose reconciliation list.
Thank you.
Trying to be disciplined as council president.
You have a vested interest in that, don't you? All right, Vivian?
And so the last update is on the Executive Regulation 6-17 AM, the before and after school childcare rebid process. The last bid took place in fiscal year 18, and the providers that were selected are listed on Circle 12 of your packet. For that rebid, 2 selection decisions were challenged in court and resulted in conflicting decisions as to the legality of the rebid process. Subsequently, NCPS and ICB decided to temporarily suspend the rebid process, again, because the regulations are going to sunset, and also, because of these complications. So the executive has indicated an intent to continue honoring the delegation of authority from the Board of Education to the ICB, but will be allowing the current regulations to sunset in July. And in the meantime, the executive and staff will be working to develop amendments to that regulation. And they've highlighted next steps in terms of working with MCPS to establish an interagency work group and various other work to look at how best to move forward.
So this is the one that's the most concerning of all the things involving CUP, because we have had legal decisions that have questioned the process. And while they are conflicting, it's one that still creates the impetus for us to move forward with a system that will help to alleviate some of the challenges that we see. And so I know, again, Council President Navarro has worked a lot on this issue, so I'm going to turn to her, but just want to say that we remain committed to being a part of this as well. We certainly understand the county executive's willingness and want to work on this issue. We continue to hear from providers as well as community members that they think that the system needs to be changed. And so from that perspective, we also have our due diligence to ensure in working with our partners, and I see Dr. Jack Smith, our superintendent, has joined us, so thank you very much, sir, for being here. So working with the superintendent and the board, we will make sure, as well as with stakeholders, of course, we'll make sure that we create a process that is fair and equitable for everyone. Council President Navarro.
Yeah, thank you. So I see here on page 9 that at the conclusion of these efforts, meaning the conversation and the benchmarking charts and all those efforts, the executive will submit the amended regulations to council for consideration and approval. Is there a timeline for that?
Well, inasmuch as we're still trying to organize ourselves, we don't have a specific timeline. I can say the last time that we did amendments to this regulation, it took about 2 years because we were involving the community as well as the internal work groups. And we came together first as one solid group, and then we broke apart to do the internal aspects of it. So we will be seeking input and trying to come up with different opportunities for input as well as looking at different models.
But it won't take 2 years, will it?
We hope not.
I would strongly
It's not the plan to take 2 years.
urge that it should not take that long because a lot of work has already been done, a lot of community input, a lot of stakeholder consultation has already taken place. So it's not like this is the first time that we're addressing this issue. And then very quickly, I did want to go back to Bill 12-15, Ms. Pearson, that you said that once the legislation is amended to include the other groups, but in reality it's the regulation that needs to be amended because the bill itself was not specific about nonprofits. It was really something that was decided via regulations. I just wanted to clarify.
That's correct. I
that.
misspoke.
Okay, thank you.
So let me just echo the council president. Look, we've been going at this for a while, and Ms. Bell Pearson, I know that you're less than a year into your formal position as executive director of CUP, but let me just say that we've got all the information, we've got the stakeholders' views, we've got where MCPS and other stakeholders are, and so from that perspective, I think that we've got enough information to really start to move things forward. We know that this is not going to be a process that is going to make everyone happy. And we understand that. There will always be quote-unquote winners and losers. There'll be folks who get contracts and folks who don't. We understand that. And that means folks won't be happy. But if we can defend our process and ensure that it, again, addresses all of the things that we consider to be fair and equitable, and we feel confident in that, then we should be able to move forward. And so my hope is that while I certainly respect and understand that the county executive and your team are leading this effort, it would be quite easy for us to work collaboratively to ensure that once those decision markers come over as far as recommendations for changes to the regulation, that it's smooth sailing through the council. The last thing that we need is to then have an extended process be held up by the fact that the council is either in disagreement or not understanding what it is that the regulations that are being sent over by the county executive are. And so from that perspective, I believe that a more seamless process will allow us to serve our community quicker and more efficiently. So I'll just leave that there.
Yep.
All right. And Vivian, I think that's it for us. All right. Well, Ms. Bell Pearson, thank you so much. Again, we look forward to continuing to work with you and ensuring that we achieve that vision for CUP as well as our CUP Enterprise Fund. So thank you very much.
Thank you, council members.
All right, so we're headed to our next one, our next item on our agenda, which is our NDA, our non-departmental account for our Montgomery Coalition for Adult English Literacy, McHale. As we're joined by Kathy Stevens, Ms. Lambert, you're going to stay there. I think you're going to be here for a while. And so let me just start off by saying this, and then I know I'll turn over to my colleagues who might want to say anything. We know the importance of adult English literacy. You know, it's something that we heard as a part of our budget testimony in the many stories of people who are immigrants who have come here to Montgomery County and achieved a great education, whether it's via Montgomery College or other entities that are here in our community, and then seeing them go and do great things in our community as well. And it's powered by their acquisition of the English language. And although some of them continue to struggle with a few words here and there, very similar to my attempt at being able to still be fluent in Spanish, it's one of those where certainly we know the benefits. And, you know, to have dual language competency is actually a tremendous plus, not only in this region, but across the world. And so we really are truly enhancing opportunities for individuals not just in terms of them being better integrated in our community, but we also benefit because they are more employable and have better profitability as a result. So again, what I like to say is if you're not doing it for the right reason about it's the right thing to do and you know it in your heart, at least do it because you know that it's going to make your government more money and mean less money that we ask you for as an individual, right? So either way, we win. So let me turn it over to Ms. Yao to walk us through some of the decision points. I don't know, Ms. Stevens, did you want to make any opening remarks? Or?
We'll just go right to Vivian, keep it short.
All right.
This morning.
Excellent. Ms. Yao.
For fiscal year 20, the executive is recommending level funding for McHale. It's $1,757,058. Ms. Stevens has explained in a memorandum to the committee that this would allow for same service delivery in fiscal year 19 and they would be limited in expanding services consistent with the goals of their strategic plan, including expanding services in the workplace, working with early care and education professionals and parents, outreach to underserved populations, and technical assistance. On page 2 of your packet is an excerpt which describes a scenario that McHale had provided to the executive on what would happen if there was an increase to their budget, which would allow them to increase grants to the strongest programs targeted at geographical areas of need, as well as working on those strategic items that I just mentioned. Ms. Stevens, in her memorandum to the committee, requested that the committee place funding in the following 2 tranches on the reconciliation list. $50,000 to be used for grants to community organizations to provide classes, as well as $25,000 to be used to support those expansion programming with new partners, underserved geographic locations, and underserved populations. As a result, council staff does recommend adding those 2 tranches to the reconciliation list. Again, McHale has been before the committee and explained what the great need in the community is, that they're reaching about 10 to 12% of the limited English proficient population, and that the board has a strategic plan to expand their services. Those funds look like they'd be ready to use like right off the ground, since McHale's already laid the foundation to doing that workplace work and that and those other things. So I think that the funding would be very well used if the council's able to find it. Council staff did want to recommend, though, that as McHale works with early care and education providers and parents, that they strategically coordinate their efforts with the new early care and education initiative announced recently by the council president and county executive, as well as implementation of the Montgomery County Early Care and Education Strategic Plan in the Department of Health and Human Services.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vivian. And actually, let me turn at this point to Ms. Stevenson, and I'll call on Council President Navarro.
Sure, thank you. Kathy Stevens, Executive Director of the Montgomery Coalition for Adult English Literacy. Thank you for having me. I was here a couple months ago where I outlined a lot of our current successes. So let me just be forward-looking for this coming fiscal year. In short, a flat-funded budget really stops us and our providers in our tracks. We are on an upward trajectory. Our grantees who rely on this funding to leverage a lot of additional funding and for their work have put forth to us just within the last week all of their grant applications, which are about $1.5 million. We typically have not fully funded all of those requests, and I don't anticipate that we will do so either. Yet, with that requested funding, they're anticipating serving another 1,500 to 1,700 learners next year. So they are doing exactly what their learners have asked from them, but it's also, of course, what the county, the council, the government, all of us are asking of them to help be as wide-serving as they can be, and to be part of this education continuum, this network that we have in the county. Recently, I've been looking at the numbers that our providers have given to me the number of parents of young children that they're serving. And the programs from which I've gotten data so far serve anywhere between 33% and 75% of their adult learners are parents of children in our school system. So there is a clear synergy, a clear relationship here as we look at, as Vivian has said, as we looked at the early care and education initiative, what we're looking at in terms of looking at our work through an equity lens. This is a clear area where our providers are really rising to the call and being a key part of different initiatives that the county has in its sites to work. So I will say too that so this $50,000 increase in our grants probably won't go the full way to support all of that, but it certainly would go a large part of the way, and we want to continue that progress. Our providers want to continue that progress. Obviously, they've seen some success, and we want to continue to support that. In addition, this committee asked me to look at what additional money those providers were leveraging, and we took a look at that, and we looked at FY18 data, because that was the year for which we had complete data. $933,000 in in-kind services that they're leveraging, an additional $1.7 million in additional funding. So we're not relying on the county for all of the money here, but we're increasing that investment so that other partners come to the table because they see what the clear investment is. We're on board to work with the Early Care and Education Initiative. I've already been part of that through the Montgomery Moving Forward group, and certainly are working with our programs to figure out how we fit into the strategic plan and the plans that the council president and the county executive have announced. And then our workplace-based classes, just simply to increase access for people. We know that time in the day is a big challenge. Hourly workers who do not have flexible schedules, and dealing with transportation and childcare. And we're in a couple hotels through BF Saul up in the Up County area, and recently we just started with Geico in the Down County area. They asked us to come on board and do a class there with them. So that just describes some of the reach that we have. But in order to continue those, we're going to need some additional support, and we'll be looking at the employers putting in some money too, but we're looking at all of that. So I think in sum, that's where we stand. We don't want to be stopped in our tracks, and we want to continue the work that benefits all of the other enumerated county initiatives that we've been hearing from both the council and the executive.
Council President Navarro.
Thank you so much for that summary and for everything that you have done. It's really amazing the work that Mikkel has been able to do and the infrastructure that's been able to establish. I think that, I keep talking about how this is sort of like new beginnings, because with a new administration and a new council, really it is the time to take stock and see where we should go. And I know that for a very long time, I've had meetings with former County Executive Leggett and also now with County Executive Elrich about the need for us to start thinking more structurally and comprehensively regarding our services to our community, to our immigrant community, to those who have been here for a while, but also those who are recently arrived. And this issue of English is so important. And so how do we do that in a holistic way? Councilmember Albornoz has already started to also work on a particular plan that we can all sign on to. I'm really excited that he's doing that, because that was going to be my year 2 initiative, but now I don't have to worry about that because he can lead that. But the bottom line is that, places like DC have a much more comprehensive approach to all of these kinds of services, whether it's ESOL for adults, whether it's workforce development, whether it's early care and education, et cetera. And they're more, and therefore you see a much more intense outcome regarding those issues. So I think it's high time for us to do that. I think this will be a great time for all of us to work together on something more comprehensive that we can then all fund next year, pull in a lot of the resources that we have in place, and then really, truly make a bold statement about this. So I know, Mikkel will play such an integral, I think, role in that initiative. So I'm very excited to be able to work towards that. I also want to say that, I'm really happy to hear you talk about the early care and education. When I was running Centro Familia, we entered into a partnership with Montgomery College, and they developed an entire track of context-based ESOL for our family child care providers that was very, very successful, and it was actually taught at the Wheaton satellite campus there, the classrooms that they have there. So that would be a great partnership because again, that already has occurred. That would be a very important component. I also wanted to let you know that the Montgomery, that the Literacy Council, the county's Literacy Council, which is a grantee of yours, but in a separate track, they are going to look at a pilot for the issue of Spanish literacy, because we do have a lot of parents who are not literate, both in English or in Spanish. And so they've decided to do a pilot, and my office is going to help recruit the first class of folks, because we have a long list of people that have asked for this. And so I hope that at some point there can also be, a crossover to what you're doing as well. That would be really critical. And then lastly, I will say that I guess on page 2, it shows a figure of $100,000. Is that what McKell has identified as?
That was our request to the county executive
I see.
for a request to be placed in the county executive's recommended.
Got it, right. So you're left short $100,000? Because the recommendation in the packet is 75.
Right.
Okay.
Well,
Vivian just came up with that.
right, we came up with that.
I understand. So I'm trying to clarify.
Short of what our original
Right.
ask was in light of the budget. Yes.
Right. So, I mean, I would just propose that we do place the $100,000 perhaps in, 2 tranches of, I don't know, I would just put the entire amount there. I think that it is absolutely imperative that we constantly just step up to what we continue to talk about on a daily basis, are part of our priorities, and serving our communities who just need this extra support is so tied to everything we talk about, expanding our tax base, our economic development goals, everything, our student achievement, so I don't think that we should, be shy about giving you what you need in order to continue this momentum. And then hopefully next year we can be talking about a really bold strategy around this issue of our, like a welcoming center of sorts, Gilchrist, much bigger, but that includes all these different components. I think it's time for us to do that. So I would just move that we place the $100,000.
Excellent. So there's been a motion. I am going to, and Councilmember Jawando had to step away. He's got a bill downstairs in public safety and will be rejoining us shortly. So, but let me just first start off by saying something that struck me, and it's been a consistent theme. And as I said in our last one, that I'm an equal opportunity critic as well as supporter. It's very interesting that the county executive sat here with us
Right.
and expressed support for McHale and expanding our reach so that we could reach more folks and ask for numbers. And you presented those numbers. The data's here. It's very clear. We're getting 10 to 12%. You have hundreds of people who are waiting for service that you cannot provide service for, but yet there was no recommended increase. Also understanding at the same time, as I said in my opening remarks, that the profitability of folks who have English competency increases, which increases, therefore, our intake when it comes to our tax base. So we get that money back and then some. I'm just confused. So I am with the council president. This is one in which I think is a no-brainer. I think that, again, we shouldn't be playing around with a lot of these things that we know are priorities for us in terms of breaking it up into tranches. When we're committed in some of these instances, we need to just say, let's put the full freight on the reconciliation list. And so I would support your recommendation of putting the $100,000 on the reconciliation list in one tranche. So that's a 2-0 with Councilmember Jawando absent, and Councilmember Jawando will certainly, I'm sure, weigh in when he comes back momentarily. So,
Thank you very much. We really appreciate that support. And Council President Navarro, just to the pilot opportunity for the Spanish literacy, I've been talking with the Literacy Council about that, and we have a couple programs that are already doing some of those programs, so we'll be able to help inform that to make sure that it gets off the ground well.
all right. So we're done with the second one. Thank you
Thank you
very
very
much,
much.
Ms. Stevens. All right, we're going to transition into our next one, which is our work session on Montgomery College's operating budget and CIP follow-up. We are joined by Dr. Darian Pollard, president of Montgomery College, Donna Shana, who's our interim senior vice president for administrative and fiscal services, Christina Schramm, our capital budget analyst, and Rich Harris from our Office of Management and Budget. And let's see, Mr. Howard, as always, our very able and very well respected senior legislative analyst who's been working with the college for a while. Why don't you, as we're trying to allow for Councilmember Jawando to do his testimony and get back, why don't you go ahead and frame a little bit of what we have before us. I'll have some remarks after that, but then certainly want to open it up to Dr. Pollard if she wanted to make any opening remarks as well.
Sure. On the table on page 1 of the budget, and then I'll talk a little bit on the second page as well, kind of frames where we are with the college's request and the executive's recommendation and the decisions and discussions that will be before the committee this morning. The college requested a total budget of $314.7 million, which is actually a small decrease over their FY19 budget. The county executive recommended $310.4 million, which is a difference of $4.3 million. I'll get into in just a second why the difference is 4.3 instead of 3.1, but because of a non-tax supported issue. But the dollars that are in the current fund and the county contribution on the next two rows of the table, the difference is $3.1 million, and that's the gap between the college's request and the executive's recommendation. Since the executive's recommendation, the college did submit some additional information on additional federal grant awards that they've received or have been notified that they will receive. And so there's an adjustment in the packet to the non-tax supported federal and state grants budget, which is why the difference in that top row is 4.3 million instead of 3.1 million. But the 3.1 million is kind of the gap. And if we turn to page 2, you can see a breakdown of the current fund, which is the college's tax supported fund. And this breaks down all the elements of the current fund, and you can see that the $3.1 million gap all comes from the county contribution in the college's request versus the executive's recommendation. The other components in terms of framing the budget overall, the college's budget does assume an increase in tuition of 3.1%, which is $4, $8, or $12 per semester hour, depending if you're in-county, in-state, or out-of-county student. This is similar to increases they've made in prior years. The impact on a student, if someone's taking 12 credit hours as a full-time student, they would be paying $2,129 per semester in FY20 compared to $2,071 in FY19. So it's about a $58 increase per semester. So a relatively small increase, but of course for the student paying it, that's more money that they have to come up with, and if you're taking more credits, that increases that amount. State aid for the college did increase by 1.7% over FY19 and is now $37.2 million. The maintenance of effort for Montgomery College, as you'll know, is level funding is the requirement from the prior year, and the executive's budget does meet the maintenance of effort requirement by level funding the county contribution. And the college plans to use about $2.97 million in fund balance as part of its FY20 budget. This is a decrease from FY19, but this is all due to the savings plan amounts for FY19 compared to FY18. And then, as always, the current fund does include a couple of other components: the emergency plant maintenance and repair fund, which is $300,000 this year, and the tax-supported grants fund, which is $400,000, and that provides for community needs not met elsewhere in the budget, including the college's adult literacy program. So those are kind of the general framing components of the budget.
All right, so we'll pause at this point, and we're joined by Councilmember Hucker, so thank you very much, Councilmember Hucker, for being here. Let me turn to Dr. Pollard for any opening remarks about the Montgomery College budget.
Well, thank you, Mr. Rice, and certainly good morning to members of the council. Glad to be here. I'll just offer a few comments, if I might. I think that We've worked diligently over the last several weeks to share with the council insights about the budget that we've submitted. I'll just take the opportunity to remind you of a few things, but first by saying thank you. The council has been particularly thoughtful and responsive to several issues for us, understanding the changing demographic of our student population, understanding the contrast that oftentimes is not illustrated, that the achievement or opportunity gap that we see in the K-12 space doesn't stop there. It follows us into higher education. And as a result of that, the students we see are students that promise, but they're also students who oftentimes need additional supports. So we're very thoughtful and dedicated in that space to doing that. As you noted, as Mr. Howard noted in his report to the board, our total appropriation request from this year is less than our request last year. In fact, this is our lowest request in 7 years of about $3.1 million to help us with compensation for our employees. We did this by doing several strategic things. We met the savings plan that the county asked us to do. We also cut approximately $8 million from our budget ourselves before we even submitted that. And then we have a proposed tuition increase that our board just approved begrudgingly earlier this week. I'll also share with you that for us, I am profoundly aware of the challenges that sit before the county right now. And I believe that I can speak, at least for the last 9 years when I've had the opportunity to lead this organization, we have been a faithful and diligent partner with the county. We understand when we need to ask for things and when we don't need to ask for things, and we're responsive when the county asks us to do things and ask us to reconsider our budget. To that end, this budget this year that we've submitted was designed with that in mind. We knew the circumstances that were there. We listened, we read tea leaves, we talked to people, and as a result of that, the budget that we submitted was very conservative, so much so that we built it primarily around a compensation adjustment for our employees of maximum 2.5% all in. And I need to say that because I have some of the most talented and dedicated faculty and staff that I've ever had the pleasure of working with. And I've worked at 3 colleges across this country. But what I know for sure is that they understand the circumstances that we've been in the county, and they came to the table, they asked, and they met us where we could meet them, and we have a signed agreement with 2 of our unions, and the 3rd hopefully will be done later on this month. So as a result of that, I don't know how I go back to them and say at the end of the day, we as a county believe in the work we do. You do. The county believes that you are a part of the economic engine and plan for this county, and that you are a people-centric organization, but we're not going to compensate your people at the levels at which we're compensating others. So as a result of that, I stand ready before you to figure out how to solve this, because my employees deserve the same compensation adjustments as any other within the county, probably even more so because they have been such a faithful partner with the county over the last several years. I'll end by also saying that our students continue to be the reason we do this work. We know for a fact that for a lot of our students, we are the first choice, second choice, third choice, and oftentimes the last choice. And they come to us, we meet them where they are, and our goal is to get them where they want to go. So we are a part of the economic development plan for this county. We are the workforce development plan for this county. And at the end of the day, I'm hopeful that the council will continue to work with us in recognizing that our employees are as equally important. Equity is also an equity and compensation issue. Although it certainly has multiple facets, we don't want to forget that as well. So with that, I thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Pollard. I'm going to turn to Council President Navarro. Did you want to have any opening remarks? And then I'll close with some and then turn it over to Mr. Howard to walk us through the packet.
Thank you very much. And I do, have some questions as we work through the packet about some particular issues. I think that in some ways it's kind of deja vu because, we are constantly having, I feel, repeating the same remarks, which usually starts with, thank you for everything that you have done to be fiscally responsible, conservative. The Board of Trustees, I think, over the years, you've always sent a message that you understand the totality of the challenges that we faced in the county vis-a-vis fiscal challenges, and you've always been a partner to participate. I think that there is no doubt there's a lot of momentum, and everybody seems to be coalescing around this notion that in order for us to really talk about sustainability and about quality of life in the county, we have got to look at our economic development strategies. And so this council is taking that very seriously and is owning that. And part of that, in every conversation that we have about economic development and about expanding our tax base, we talk about Montgomery College. As a matter of fact, in conversations I've had about how the negotiations and the presentations to Amazon, which we were not part of, but then learned about some of the components, I've heard that, one of the things that really attracted Amazon to the county was the fact that we had Montgomery College, we had USG, we had this extraordinary higher education opportunities, and it really reflects not only the county, but the state and the country's population. And so that was a real asset. And I believe that that is an integral component of this very large task that we have in front of us in terms of truly putting our mark in the region as a county that means business and that will definitely do everything possible to position ourselves. So that's why for me this is just a no-brainer. And as much as we talk about equity, it seems like it doesn't register for some people that just because you have, decreased enrollment doesn't mean that the challenges and the barriers that the students who are there does require constant attention to the level of resources and the level of support. So, for me, and as council president, we switch every year, and the council president has to sort of figure out how all these pieces are working together and working with my colleagues to see what kind of budget we're going to shepherd. This is the number one priority for me. Of course, MCPS is another one, but in terms of education writ large, I have two number one priorities. They're under the umbrella of education. See how quick I did that? But that's why you're president. And I can also do it in Spanish. But my point is that, and all my colleagues have agreed that education needs to be our number one priority. And so I just wanted to just put that on record. I am interested in hearing from you as we go through the packet about what have been your observations regarding the enrollment challenge. What is it that's causing this to be a challenge for so many of our residents? Because I know that access to higher education is a huge, huge goal for so many of our residents. And so I'd like to understand if you have any insights into that, and really appreciate also Mr. Howard's packet, because I think, one thing that's just jumped up at me, page number 3 at the bottom, where it says that if the college were still expected to fund 38% of its budget request via student tuition and fees in FY20, it would need to increase tuition revenue by $24.8 million, equivalent to a 34% tuition increase. Well, that just literally completely negates the purpose and the mission of the college. That's right. We might as well just say, forget it. So, this is a kind of conversation that is multifaceted, and I worry that sometimes it just gets simplified into just numbers and into graphs, and we have to move away from that. So, I just wanted to really put that on record, and as when we get to the piece about tuition increase, I also would like to understand in dollars, what does that translate into, what the board approved? And I think I asked that last time. I want to know what is that number as well. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Council President. And I can't say that I just love the comments that you just made. I'm going to turn to Councilmember Hucker. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for allowing me just to pop in for a minute. I wish I could stay for the whole discussion, but we're working on the police transparency bill in the Public Safety Committee. I am really glad to hear the comments from both of you, because I'm very supportive of the college's request as well as I am of MCPS's request, and I wish I could stay for that discussion. The largely working class constituents and the east side of the county that I represent so much count on Montgomery College to take our extremely promising and talented young people and prepare them for success for the economy of the future. And this is not a time we ought to be scaling back on toward that goal at all.
And you're absolutely right. I was thinking the same thing at a time we're having a years-long conversation and commitment about racial equity and social justice, and at a time when all 9 of us are very focused pre-Amazon's decision and post-Amazon's decision on economic development and what we're doing to drive private sector job growth in Montgomery County. The way to do that isn't to cut back on the college. That we got to practice what we preach. And the budget needs to, reflect our values and our statements that way. So anyway, I hope you know where I am. I'm just popping in for a minute to tell you I support the college and MCPS, but also I had a great conversation with Dr. Pollard yesterday about something that's been on my mind for a while, and it's been discussions with you all, which is our ability to train our young people for the green jobs that are out there, that are going unfilled, that our employers are saying we don't have the workforce trained to step into these open, lasting and well-paying jobs, whether it's with solar companies or with pipeline or cable companies or stormwater or many other industries. They're going unfilled. And Kelly Services says that Maryland is one of the top 5 states in the country for green jobs in the future because of the growth in all these industries right here. So I don't have a developed proposal now. I know you're going to have other work sessions on the college. I hope you'll fund their budget, and then I hope maybe several of us could work together on a small rec list proposal that would allow us to leverage earned dollars, which the state likes to send to the college, and federal dollars that are out there and private dollars that are out there, to make sure we have a real sort of united front in this space. And the college has been successful in the past at pivoting some of the work they're already doing. This wouldn't necessarily be all net new expenditure, because they've been very successful at taking like their welding program and pivoting it into solar installers. And there's a lot of probably existing programs that we could tweak to be more responsive to the jobs of the future. So.
Well, Councilmember Hucker, you can always come to the Education and Culture Committee with testimony like that, sir. So thank you very much. And thank you for attending our Education Budget Forum that was at Montgomery College in Tacoma Park, Silver Springs campus. Absolutely. Thank you very much. So, once again, I find myself confused. We have colleagues who have expressed their interest in understanding and supporting where Montgomery College is going and why Montgomery College is a priority for us as a community. But yet, we find them as the only entity that actually was reduced in terms of their budget, which confuses me in that sense. Mr. Harris, I'm not done. I'll call on you. This is one in which, from my perspective, is problematic. And it's problematic because I think it speaks to a larger message that I continue to see. And I feel with my last 3 years on the council that I have to call things like I see them. And I've been very displeased with the fact that continually Montgomery College seems to be the attention getter when it comes to scrutiny and talk about reductions in numbers and how things just aren't there and aren't adding up and they don't rise to the same priority as other entities. And I just have to ask why. And I don't have an answer. And I'd love for someone on the executive side to give me an answer. So, Mr. Harris, make sure you have that answer ready. I know you're going to tell me about how another department may be negative funded, but that's fine. I'd like to have that answer. Because for me, it seems as though there's something afoot that's more than just about being conservative in budgets. Especially when we understand that overall, when it comes to economic development, I don't know what's more powerful than what we heard in terms of testimony at our education budget forums. Plenty of professional people coming out there and talking about the fact that they utilized the classes at Montgomery College, the programs at Montgomery College, to make themselves more successful, which means more money coming into our coffers. The very same conversation that we just had with Mikhail. You prepare people to become even better citizens in our community. Some who are giving back by then teaching by then giving back and creating nonprofits in our community. Those are all things that have come through the door of Montgomery College. But yet, we say that this is something in which we want to level fund. I understand that it's not reduction from that standpoint in terms of what in reality is there from last year. But you already have signed agreements. And unless you're going to honor those, then that requires you to do it on the backs of students, to cut programs, or to cut funding for existing contracts with your employees. Either way, that's not a valid argument in terms of disincentivizing our investment in education. That's not a valid justification. And I'm sick and tired of it. And I've told the county executive in the media and in person, and I'll say it again today. I am sick and tired of us attacking Montgomery College, an institution that we know is valued and who has a tremendous contribution to our community and continues to be attacked. It needs to stop. Mr. Howard, please take us through the packet. Well, actually, no. Let me turn to Mr. Harris.
Sure. Thank you. For the record, my name is Richard Harris with the Office of Management and Budget. The thing I was going to point out is that the college's budget from the current fund perspective is not actually reducing. That was the thing that piqued my interest. It is level funded. I'd say the county executive is supportive of the college. He's actually also specifically interested in the workforce development programs that were discussed earlier. I know last month or the month before he actually met with the college specifically on that topic. At the same time, he has to balance a budget, and he recognizes that the county's been very generous to the college over the past 5 or 7 years. And in light of that, the revenues just are not supporting the level of funding that's requested. The enrollment is down, not just this year, but many years in a row. It's 25% of what it was in fiscal 13. That's 1/4 of the student body is just not there, but the funding has gone up precipitously. Quickly. I looked back to see when the current fund enrollment was as low as it is in the proposed budget, and it's before 2004. The numbers that I have just went back to 2004. Funding in that year was $66 million from in the county contribution. Of course, everything's more expensive than it was in 2004. CPI would put that amount in current dollars at $89 million, but of course higher ed is going at much faster than CPI. But the fact remains, in 15 years, the college's request was for well more than twice as much as it was funding, as it received to educate fewer students in only 15 years. The county executive's budget is fiscally responsible in light of the current fiscal situation.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Harris. And again, you said a lot of numbers and things like that, but in my conversations, it's about people. We get elected to these positions to represent people. While at the same time we have a certain amount of fiscal accountability that we need to adhere to, we also have to understand where we wisely invest. Just as we talk about OPEB and talk about all kinds of things that we feel are going to strategize us in the future to have a strong AAA bond rating and defense of that in New York, and make sure that our tax policy is one that's fair and equitable and doesn't price folks out of being here. But we also have to talk about the fact of, well, there are people here who need help and assistance, and what our responsibility is to them. A person like Stan Z, who came out and testified, and his story struck me for a number of reasons. One, because as a young Asian man, the obvious assumption is that Stan Z doesn't need any help. He's Asian. He's going to do well in school. Well, Stan talked about his personal struggle and how he struggled and how there were a lot of people who didn't think that he needed help. And it was Montgomery College who actually came to his rescue, and now he's a project manager incredibly successful in living here in Montgomery County. That's just one of the thousands of stories. I have personal anecdotes of my own. They're all attached to something that goes beyond the numbers. And so I think that, while we do talk about numbers, I will just say that I know that Montgomery College has had no full-time faculty positions added in the past 5 years. They've decreased their part-time faculty by 13.5% over the past 4 years. They have 47 full-time faculty positions that are being held in abeyance. They tighten their position control when it comes to revised lapse calculations to make sure that they're adjusting to some of the things that we see. Also, by the way, we asked them to create all of these new facilities, which require staffing to be there. And oh, by the way, when it came to Germantown's campus that increased in campus square footage by 43%, they only added 38 positions. I'd say that's pretty fiscally responsible. And so while I understand your numbers, I've got my numbers as well. Mr. Howard.
Thank you. So on page 3, we have a lengthy write-up and discussion on enrollment. We've already talked about a lot of the issues about some of the declines in enrollment and where the college projects that going forward. And Councilmember Navarro also made the very important point about the role of tuition and the way that the tuition plays in enrollment. I wanted to give the college has done a lot of work in looking at the enrollment and looking at where the enrollment comes from. And we had a committee session on this about a year and a half ago to go over some of those data points and how they do their projections. So I wanted to give the college an opportunity to talk about where they see the enrollment changes coming from and what are some of the programs that they're working on specifically designed to increase enrollment.
Can I just add?
Council President.
Yeah, I would also like to hear if you've had any conversations, to get feedback from students, et cetera, in terms of what are some of those barriers that exist and why is it that you are seeing this decrease? Because I think we all need to own this and figure out what's happening so that we can hopefully address it.
Thank you, Madam President and Mr. Chair. A couple observations about enrollment that I'll offer, and I have a whole lot of smarter people around me. Matter of fact, maybe I'll defer first to my board chair who's joined us. Mr. Nav, do you want to say anything about enrollment first before I jump in?
No, go ahead.
Okay. A couple things that I would offer. One is that I think we have to take enrollment within a national context. Just as any discipline or any industry, if one looks at one in particular, you are missing the bigger picture about the issues. College enrollment in community college nationally has decreased, and it accounts for several particular reasons why this has happened. One is that, in particular in Montgomery County, but when you have a good economy, we're in a virtual unemployment right now in Montgomery County, and we know this nationally, unemployment is much lower than it has been. While some people may not feel it, the economy in a lot of ways is strong. And as a result of that, when students have to make the choice between going to college and going to work, they will go to work. In fact, there's a research study out of Inside Higher Ed quoted in 2015 that talks about for every % increase you see in a decrease in unemployment, you see a substantive 2.5%, I think, increase in a decrease in college enrollment, because money in the pocket now versus money in the future is not something that people are going to make that choice for. So in a county when we have virtual unemployment, people are going to work. Secondly, college is still cost prohibitive for many people. So we have more students who are taking classes part-time. I think 65% of our students are going part-time versus full-time. So as a result of that, they're having to make choices about what they're going to do. Do I pay rent? Do I have transportation costs met? Do I feed my family? Do I have health care and all the types of things that go with that, instead of paying for tuition? And many of those students are having to make those choices. They simply can't do that, even in the midst of the fact of trying to oftentimes qualify for Pell Grants and other forms of financial aid. It just simply is not possible. Third, one of the things that is obvious to me, I find quite interesting, is nobody is glaringly focusing on. We all talk about the wonderful bubble that is moving through MCPS, and my colleagues at MCPS are seeing growth at levels. Every time Jack opens his mouth, I'm waiting to see how many more people bloomed that day. They just come out of the woodworks. But that bubble is located within certain parts of MCPS. If I'm correct, it's right now in middle school. We have seen a decrease in the high school graduation yield. So as a result of that, our yield rate, which when I first arrived in Montgomery County is roughly 25% of students who graduated from MCPS attended Montgomery College. The part that's interesting about that is that as the number has gone down, so has the yield rate, which I'm going to speak to something else in a moment. So right now we're about 23%, 22% of graduating high school students come to Montgomery College. What has happened as a result of this contraction in higher education as a space, my friends who are at institutions where they are not open access, they simply just increase access. There's a lot of research that talks about the pendulum in higher education. When we want to limit the number of people who go to college, we simply decrease the amount of enrollments that are allowed in. So you will hear institutions speak to the fact that they are increasing their enrollment requirements. Admission standards become more challenging. You have lots of questions about what placement tests will be used. Will they allow dual credit and concurrent credit courses to come in? All the efforts around policy to restrict access. And there are certain economic periods to follow that. The other end of the pendulum swings in that, oh, you know what, we don't have enough people enrolled in higher education right now, so let's go back and create all those access programs and let's focus on the fact that we need to have more people here. So one of the other statistics I thought was pretty interesting, as I said here, when the college had our historic enrollment peak in FY13, there were no new county funds or new positions that were attached to that. We were asked to serve more people, and we were asked to do it with the people that we had. And guess what? We did it. So I struggle that, yes, it's convenient to talk about the fact that we have fewer enrollments right now without putting that within a national, even state context. It's also convenient to have those conversations without understanding the economic drivers that have influenced that. The other part that I find pretty interesting about this is that for us as an organization the size that we are, we may be talking 1 to 2, I'll even give you 3 students less in the class each semester. I still have tens of thousands of students that we need to serve, whose lives are just as complex, if not more, who have needs that we're understanding how to respond to them better. So when I look at the positions that we've added since FY15, of them have been primarily around issues around student success. Our ACES program, our welcome centers, our grant-funded nursing staff to help students be successful into meeting and economic development in the county, our Achieving the Promise Academy, our early learning centers, our community engagement, our early middle colleges. We've done that by making sure that we had the opportunity to put resources towards student success and access. So I can appreciate the fact that it is a good space to go to when you're trying to make heavy and hard decisions about budget, to say, well, you're serving fewer students, therefore you need fewer dollars. That belies the context in which we operate, and it also belies the fact that when we had more students to serve, we were doing so at more significant numbers and doing so readily because it was a need for us to do that.
Dr. Pollock, can you also share, I'm curious about the completion rate issue. So how does that also play into this, conversation? Because of course, a lot of times we talk about enrollment and then we seem to forget to talk about completion. And what is required in terms of support for a student population that perhaps has a lot of challenges to get to that, graduation point. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I'm happy to. So a couple of things about completion is that the college is at par nationally and actually ahead above the statistics as it relates to organizations of our size and demography. We are a gloriously diverse institution. As a result of that, we have 72% of our students identify as students of color. But we also know we have significant numbers of our students who come to us in poverty and significant numbers of our students who come needing remediation in math and English. We're doing significant work with MCPS to look at how we start to reduce that amount of remediation, but it still exists. So first, the state asked us several years ago to go through a process of reducing the number of courses that were required for a particular degree. Then they also asked us to do work in terms of sequencing, so the students aren't able to get through certain amounts of their coursework without having taken their developmental coursework. So I just actually was looking at our scorecard data right now that we'll be publishing at the end, a couple weeks now. Our students, our retention rate from fall to spring continues to be about 80%, which I think is, and that is our highest that we've been. That should be a number that should be in the packet. And then in addition to that, our fall to fall retention rate is about the same as it has been for the last 2 years. The other thing that I will offer is that our completion in developmental education has jumped significantly. When I say we're talking 10 to 12% in certain areas. As a result of that has been because we've had this tight coupling with MCPS, we're looking at alternative placement measures, and our faculty have gone through the process of redesigning curriculum. So we are also becoming aware of the fact that our students' lives are simply more complex. Our students are having to make difficult choices around basic needs necessity. It's a whole set of literature that is out about this right now. Students who are having to make choices and who are homeless, who are hungry, who are trying to figure out where their next meal is coming from, all the complexities that go with that. And to think that that stops when they leave a K-12 system, to think that stops because they are 18 years old or above is just simply not the case. We know for a fact, if you look at what's happening within the county itself, we have growing pockets of poverty. Those folks need places to go to college. They're trying to either go through short-term certificates, long-term certificates, or pursuing degrees. So it is indeed a very, completion has a context and a richness that if you just look at the numbers without understanding, you look at Harvard, Harvard has a 98% completion rate. Guess what? They only admit 3% of the people that apply, and those students are the ones who would have been successful anywhere. Our students come to us and we meet them where they are. And as a result of that, we get them to where they need to go.
Thank you for that. This week we had, every year during budget, we have meetings with our Jewish nonprofit organizations and different organizations that provide services to the Jewish community and the rest of the county population. And it was very interesting because one of the representatives asked me, what would I say to the parents that have been very vocal and critical of some of the efforts and conversations that are going on right now with MCPS regarding boundary changes. And apparently there have been a lot of very negative and very sort of racist comments back at students. I saw a photo, I wasn't able to attend, but my staff did, and there was a photo of a parent literally yelling at an African-American student. And it was interesting because, one of the things I said was that, we continue having this struggle in the county where somehow we just get so scared of the fact that we are a very diverse county where, we're majority of color at this point, and that somehow something is just, going to be taken away. But then I'm reminded that these changes didn't happen overnight, didn't happen yesterday. It's been happening for decades, and it's still an amazing county to live in. It's still a high-functioning county. So this notion that somehow we need to kind of run away and shy away from these conversations, but also address these issues, because let's just call it what it is. I mean, if we are truly committed to making sure that the county continues to succeed, then doing everything we can for an institution like yours that is serving, you said, what, 70% students are of color, who are serving these students so that they can turn around, just like the students we heard from in the public hearings, extraordinary stories, those are not isolated. Then we are really setting ourselves to fulfill these prophecies that people keep trying to perpetuate, that somehow because we are becoming majority of color, somehow we are eroding the quality of life. And that is a serious thing that we need to own as leaders, as elected officials, because there is that very fragile balance. So, I see it all through that lens, and I am so proud of all of our residents that day in and day out, regardless of socioeconomic status or whatever, do amazing things to aspire to get to that next level. And to think of these students who are taking public transportation, we just talked with Mikkel, I've run into students, adults, who are literally getting off a bus at Kennedy High School, rushing, coming from work to make it to that ESOL class. The effort that goes into it, it's something that I am not unfamiliar with because I am an immigrant, and so is my husband. And, we started like a lot of people started. I had a little bit of a head start because I'm a college graduate, and so is my husband, but that doesn't mean that it was easy. So I think it's so important for us to stop glossing over these conversations. It is high time, I think, to just, own it and understand that whole graphic about equity that we keep talking about, the kids in the box, that this is that example. This is what we're talking about. Because if not, we're going to have to pay for it. Even, the cost of opportunity will come back to bite us. It was already biting us. So anyway, I just really feel so strongly about this, and I feel so proud of our students who are out there, figuring this stuff out. A part of me kind of feels bad because I kind of look at it and I hear some other leaders kind of saying, oh my God, I can't believe this, Montgomery County, that this is happening, that these people are saying what they're saying. And I'm thinking, you know what, I've been dealing with this every time, from the moment I decided to run for public office, okay? My staff has been dealing with this. Just this week, one of my staff members answered the phone and put it on speaker, and this man yelled at him the N-word. And so this is happening right now. And for us to want to pretend that it's not, it's absolutely ridiculous. And so anyway, to me, it's all connected. And that's why I just think that it is absolutely not even a question, that we have got to do everything we can to give you the resources that you need. Same thing with MCPS as well. So anyway.
Well, thank you very much, Council President. Let me just say, I was trying to do some back-of-the-envelope math, so just help me, because again, while I'm a person who talks about stories, I also like to also have numbers to back up where I am. Help me to understand, over the past 2 or 3 years, we've lost about 2,000, 1,000 students. How many students have we contracted in the past 2 or 3 years? It doesn't have to be exact. I just want a rough estimate.
In the last 2 to 3 years, I'd probably say about 2,000 to 3,000.
Okay. So, and then how many classes does Montgomery College offer over its 3 campuses?
Roughly 3,500 sections a semester.
So 3,500 sections, and if we had, let's just use the high number of 3,000, that's 1 person per section. 1 person per section does not mean that all of a sudden we can fire a professor or not fill a position. So again, it's not changing your day-to-day operations. It's not even changing, if you're cleaning up, right? So let's even take it from your support staff and your service staff that service your facilities. Whether you have 26 people in the classroom using the bathroom or 27 people, and I know that'd be a very small class. I know that's not realistic. I'm thinking more of MCPS, but regardless of how many it is, let's say it's 50 or 55 using the restroom. It's not changing. They still have to go in there at hourly times and change the paper towels and make sure that all the toilets are functioning and all the things. These are the day-to-day operations. And so I just want to be sure that I'm not missing something in understanding that even with the contrition that you have in terms of numbers, it does not significantly impact your day-to-day operations. Would that not be a fair statement?
I believe that's an extremely fair statement. And more importantly, what I also would add to that is while we may have students who are taking fewer FTE and that they are taking fewer courses, I would offer we potentially have more people because they are taking courses, fewer courses, just the same number of people there. They're just not able to take as much because they can't afford it. So they're coming in. So it's interesting. If you look at the number in terms of enrollment, if you look at right now, our enrollment in 2018 is 21,000, in FY18 was 21,720. And then if you look at 17, it was 22,008. So that was roughly 1,000 students less. If you keep going back even to the high of 2013, that's 5,000 students. at that time is still 21,000 students, and this is on credit side. I'm not even talking about what we do in terms of non-credit. I'm also not talking about the fact that, again, we may have fewer numbers of credits being accumulated, but it still equates to a certain number of people who have to come there, whose lives are still as complex and demanding, if not more, than students we would have had in 2009, 7, 4, 2000.
And not even just that, but I think that what we should do in moving forward in the future is also start to look at beyond just credit classes. Because the gentleman last night who testified said that he was in his apprenticeship program actually taking some classes that were non-credit classes. He had talked about that and mentioned that. And so from that perspective, I think that it's important for us to understand the true utilization of the college as a whole relating to the previous year. Because again, if we're just talking about staffing, right, which is a part of the budget, if the budget is staffing, because remind me again of how much of your budget is staffing?
About 80%.
80%. So huge majority of it's staffing. And if the staffing is tied directly to the utilization of the college, right? So utilization of the campus, whether it's non-credit or credit, those are the things that don't change. And again, tie directly to your staffing models. If you have 30,000 people on campus, whether the cohort has shifted from 15,000 and 15,000 to 10,000 and 20,000 or even 10,000 and 17,000, that's still a heck of a lot of folks utilizing your facility. Grass still needs to be cut. The windows still need to be cleaned. All the kind of stuff that goes into it beyond just faculty, right? Because we always want to talk just about faculty. And I just came out of a meeting with your representatives from AFSCME who reminded me of all the great things that they continue to do that don't change, right? Regardless of whether you may lose 1,000 students or not.
Well, and it also, to your point, if you look at our enrollments in our non-credit continuing education, 2015 we were at 41,446 total student enrollment. In 2018 we will be at 46,129. So there is the secret sauce of Montgomery College in a lot of ways is what we do in our workforce development and continuing education, where they're crafting short-term experiences of learning, long-term experiences of learning, and they're seeing greater numbers of students do that.
And remind me again, non-credit classes are still taught by faculty?
They are taught primarily by part-time faculty, yes.
I was being facetious, I apologize. It's just one of those things where, again, it just confounds me. Mr. Harris.
I just wanted to point out that the Workforce Development Continuing Ed program, which is growing, which is good, is largely self-sufficient and actually runs a bit of a surplus. So there's funding from that program that goes towards institutional support and operations and maintenance of plant, which goes towards some of the things that we're talking about, the larger needs that's outside of just the classroom specifically.
Right, so it's going back to the very students who need the support?
Yeah, but it's self-sufficient.
I would hope so.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd hope we'd structure it that way. I don't understand what that point was. I mean,
If you agree with that, then I have nothing else to say.
Okay, thank you for that contribution. All right, Mr.
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam President. Thank you very much for your comments. Thank you for your previous support. As you can tell, I'm here to be supportive of the team that's here. Dr. Pollard and her team don't really need a whole lot more support because we couldn't have a better spokesperson than her or leader for the organization, and so we're very fortunate. But I would just want to add to the point that the notion of completion oftentimes is defined very specifically as it relates to how we look at it at a federal level, how we look at it at a state level. And so when we're looking at completion in today's world, people are coming in and taking all kinds of different courses. And so completion for me may be very different from completion from you. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going and getting a general studies degree and I'm going to transfer to the University of Maryland College Park. It's what you were alluding to, Mr. Chairman, which is the notion that we have to look at what do I need to get to the next step in my position, whatever that is. How do I make myself more economically viable and successful? And so whether it's taking a workforce class, whether it's taking an English class, a variety of things. And so we have to your point, we have to look at this holistically. And so we've got to be in a position to be able to provide access and expand that access so that as your colleague, Mr. Hucker, was indicating earlier, we can pivot and we can allow our workers and our residents to be able to obtain whatever it is that they need to ultimately be successful. And so, it's easy sometimes to pigeonhole some of the things we're measuring in education because that's how the feds look at it, that's how the states look at it, that's how the county looks at it. But the reality is, we know that Montgomery College is situated in such a way that we've got to be accessible to everyone coming in from whichever directions they may need to get that additional education they need to go do that next thing to be successful. And it may not fit into a nice, neat little box that we can measure. And so that's what we're trying to position ourselves to be able to do. The other piece is the notion that we're trying to kind of be static and we're requesting a similar budget relative to last year. We've reduced our budget from last year by $8 million. The board continues to push Dr. Pollard and her team, recognizing the statistics that we're seeing. We can look at the enrollment numbers too. So what is it that we're doing to be more agile, more nimble? How do we make sure that we, to the extent that we still have a lot of people using that bathroom on the hour, how do we do that better? How do we do that more efficiently? How do we look at other ways to begin to address that? And so we're not sitting here in a static situation saying, hey, let's keep what we have and let's just try and keep that flat funding going into next year. We're trying to push that because we know that we need those resources ultimately to go back to serve more students. And so that's the objective we're trying to achieve as a board in concert with Dr. Pollard and her team.
Yeah, let me just say thank you because, again, one of the statistics that I quoted is your decreased part-time faculty by 13.5% over the last 4 years. That's indicative of exactly what you're talking about. If it's not reflective and being reactionary to the decreased enrollment and trying to figure out ways in which you may be able to combine classes together, right? Those kinds. I understand what all of those is, being the son of a teacher and then principal and then university administrator who gets and understands what happens and how you want to try and adjust these kinds of things to make it more efficient. That's where those numbers come from. They don't just come from, just the fact that, well, maybe there's not as much waning interest in this particular entity. Those are the one-offs. But in reality, it is about saying, can we combine these classes together and then, as a result, not hire another part-time faculty member, and that's how you get to 13.5% over the past 4 years. Dr. Pollard, before I turn to Mr.
The
Howard.
last thing I'll offer in this is that I'm the only community college in the state. Actually, I think I'm the only higher education institute in the state that has 3 collective bargaining units. I'm the only one that has negotiations in a county where we believe deeply in organized labor. So if we want to also believe deeply in that, we have to understand what the impact of that is. And I will also say to that, the board has held me accountable for that through 2 very clear messages. One, we went out and did a compensation analysis, and we have redone our compensation model that is a market-based model now. We have I probably would say we're going to lead the county in terms of how this work has to be done. So as a result of that work, we have done found tremendous efficiencies internally regarding this, and we have also then, as a result of that, negotiated fair contracts, not the contracts that our folks, even I would have maybe wanted to see them have, but knowing what we could afford and what's reasonable for us to do. So I think there is an important point. Yes, we recognize enrollments have contracted. Where I'm also want is the recognition of what we have done to be responsive to that and how we've done that in ways that have a long term been our strategy, is particularly as I think about what we've done with benefits years ago as an institution compared to what the rest of the county's done.
Yeah, last time I checked, both Montgomery College and MCPS participated in the last savings plan willingly. So, there's that. Mr. Howard.
Okay, so Dr. Pollard kind of stole my thunder there a little bit. I wanted to talk about the compensation. This happens almost every time, but real quickly on page 4, the compensation and benefits. To her point, the table 4 shows what the college bargaining units have received over the past 2 years, and then what's proposed for this year. In FY18 and 19, they all received a 3% total pay increases, and the FY20 proposals are 2.5% for the faculty, 2.0% for non-represented employees, and as you heard earlier, AFSCME is still in negotiations, so that number is not finalized yet. So these, in total, the wage adjustments, when we talk about cost containment, are one of the smallest, if not the smallest, over the past few years of all the county agencies. And similar on page 5, we have a little bit of information on group insurance costs, and all this type of information the council is going to hear in more detail when we talk about compensation and benefits across all agencies. But again, you'll note that the college's group insurance expenditures over the past 5 and 10-year trends have been on the lower side compared to some of the other agencies. On page 6, we have some information on some of the new programmatic enhancements. Again, there's a significant amount of reductions that came before these, so these aren't additional dollars, but the college was able to add a few different things in terms of adding some financial aid staff, the early college and summer bridge programs, expanding that in partnership with MCPS. $160,000 for scholarships, and this again is the proceeds from the Tacoma Park Early Learning Center that the college is using every year a little bit to provide scholarships for students. And then I think it was mentioned earlier some of the new buildings that have been opened. There's $216,000 for operational costs of those new buildings, but the college did not add additional staff along with that. That's just the the energy costs and the maintenance costs for the new facilities. On page 7, we have a table of the non-tax supported funds. The council does need to appropriate these dollars so the college can spend them, but these are all, the executive's recommendation is in alignment with what the college requested. With two notes I want to make. In the cable TV fund, there was a decrease of $12,000 in the executive's recommendation from the college's request based on the actual amount of money that's available in that fund, and the college is fine with that change. And then in the federal, state, and private grants, the college does anticipate receiving an additional $1.245 million in grant dollars, so we've adjusted that total number accordingly. And on page 8, we can, unless there's any other questions, we can talk about staff's recommendations, and then we do have one CIP follow-up issue we need to take up. So staff's recommendations are as follows: to support the budgets requested by the college and recommended by the executive for the non-tax supported funds, including the executive's technical adjustment to reduce the cable TV fund by $12,000. Support the college's technical adjustment to the grants expenditures by $1,245,000, and then place $3.1 million on the reconciliation list to support the college's requested county contribution in 3 increments of $1.1 million, $1 million, and $1 million.
All right, so I think, and unfortunately, Councilmember Jawando, I know, is still defending his bill downstairs in public safety. So it's just the two of us. I typically don't, as chair, make suggestions. I will just say this: for the first 2, let's take those up. I think there's no objection there, and we'll support those. As far as number 3, I'll just put out there my take, and then Council President, it'll be up to you to make a motion. Much as we did with McHale, I think that it's clear that we support the $3.1 million. So I would encourage us just putting the 3.1 in totality on the reconciliation list, but I'll turn to my colleague to make a formal motion.
Yeah, I move that we place the total amount on the reconciliation list. And
I second that. All right. Yep. So we have a 2-0 with pending from Councilmember Jawando, who texted me, wanted to make sure that he says he supports the college. So I wanted to make sure he texted me that I said that in public so that folks do understand. Before we go to the CIP amendments, let me say this. And Mr. Harris, I understand you have a tough job to do. Let me just say that I have an even tougher one. You don't have to go home and answer phone calls and emails from people in the community that are telling stories about how this impacts them on a daily basis. And so that's why this is personal and so important to me. And so I want you to understand that we're not coming from an adversarial role in terms of that I understand you have a job to do. But our job is one that encompasses so much more when it comes to really taking the vision of this county and seeing what it means for our future generations here and how to make our community a better place. It's so much larger than just numbers, and I'm not saying that you only think that way, but it is one in where we have to look at this holistically from so many different avenues, and that $3.1 million represents so much more than just numbers on paper. It represents programs, it represents opportunity, and it represents continued belief in people who oftentimes are left behind. And that's why it's so important for us to support this. And I really want to thank Council President Navarro for her statement at the beginning. I couldn't agree with her more. I think that we couldn't be under better leadership at a time when we need it. So thank you. Thank you to all of you, and we'll move on to the CIP amendments. Mr. Howard.
So with the CIP on the 21st, the committee made its initial recommendations on the college's CIP amendments, but did not discuss the additional $1.5 million and FY20 current revenue reduction that the executive included in his March 15th operating budget. As we discussed briefly on the 21st, there's really only two projects that the college has where this reduction could be taken, the information technology project and the network infrastructure project. And so, those are really the only places we could go. And after having some discussions with the college about what the best scenario might be, council staff's recommendation is that the committee make a non-recommended reduction to the information technology project for the full $1.5 million.
Comments from Montgomery College? Again, being a great partner, we appreciate that. And we'll go ahead and, without objection, and 2-0 with Councilmember Jawando pending. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. We are done with Montgomery College. Thank you very much. We are moving on to Montgomery County Public Schools. We're going to be joined by Mr. Levchenko as well as Mr. Howard will stay put. We have one generic item, which is capital improvements program amendments. And then there's also one specific item, the special appropriation amendment to something that I know a little well, our Seneca Valley High School revitalization expansion project. So as we're joined by Andy Zuckerman, our COO of Montgomery County Public Schools, as well as Dr. Jack Smith, I think we may have, oh no, she's still here. We have our Board of Education member, Pat O'Neill, who's with us, James Song, who's our Director of Facilities Management, as well as Adrienne Karamias, our Director of Division of Capital Programming and Department of Facilities Management, as well as Erica Lopez-Finn from our Office of Management Budget. Thank you so much for all of you for being here. I'll turn it over to you, gentlemen. I think Mr. Levchenko is going to tee off.
Yeah, the primary focus of today's meeting is to actually go through the individual projects. However, given we're working our way, rapidly through the budget process, I did provide some updates on where we stand in a number of areas, including, for instance, state aid. With the conclusion of the state legislative session, we have partial finality to that, and you can quote me on that. First, there was no legislation that passed that created new buckets of money. That was what we were hoping for in terms of a more a multi-year approach that would help us better in terms of our budgeting. So that did not happen. But we did have an increase in the amount of money put in the statewide amount. And we currently stand very close to our budget in terms of what's been allocated to the county. I've noted that on page 3. We stand at about $57.2 million, but there's still about $90 million left to be allocated. So we are very optimistic that we're going to see some bump in that. And in fact, the executive had sent over a memo a couple days ago indicating his expectation, I think, of between 70 and 73 million. We won't really know that until the interagency commission finalizes its allocations. But so on the state aid side, at least, we're not looking at a gap that we have to deal with. And in fact, we might have an increase in FY20 that will help give us some flexibility. Unfortunately, that doesn't speak to the out years. We're still faced with the same state aid program going forward in the out years, as well as the high enrollment grant program as well. So one thing we will have to decide is what to assume in those out years, if anything different from our current approved. But FY20 does look better. Just to remind you of the budget gap we are dealing with, there's a lot of numbers in this packet. I'll try to touch on just a few of them to set the stage for our discussion on the projects. Pages 4 and 5 of the packet include a lot of the relevant numbers. The Board of Education's request was about 47, almost 48 million more than the approved 6-year program. However, the executive's recommendation, which has to balance within spending affordability, reduced that amount. and did it in a couple ways. One, with some technical adjustments that I think we can accept, but also with an affordability reduction. And that affordability project is basically the target that we gave the school system, or the committee gave the school system, to try to come to with its non-recommended reductions. That affordability reconciliation string of numbers is located on page 5 of the packet at the bottom of the table 4. It's about $51 million over the 6 years. And you can see it as it's spread out. So that was what we gave the school system as a guideline for what we wanted to see their response to. And they did provide that. That's on page 6 of the packet. And they did it with a number of substantive changes to projects that we're going to talk about each of those, as well as some technical adjustments that I don't think we need to necessarily get into today. But we're going to go through each of those individually so that you understand what was originally requested or what was in the approved, what the non-recommended reductions would do, what that impact is, and so the committee can get some flavor of that. We do have some flexibility. I mentioned earlier the state aid in FY20. The executive's technical reductions also helped us in FY20 a little bit, and staff does support those. We also do have some additional project changes that we can talk about, including within the Woodward and Northwood projects, where we expect those numbers to change a bit. I've shown later on MCPS's latest string of numbers for those based on the board's March 25th action. So that may also free up some resources within the 6-year period, because some of those dollars will go beyond 6 years. So there's a lot of moving parts that can help us try to restore hopefully a significant portion of the request, but it's still a little early yet to know that. And also, obviously, you've got the rest of the CIP that has to be balanced. And so staff can't speak to what resources will be needed for that. But are there any questions regarding the macro aspect of this?
So let me pause for a moment, because I want to give Councilmember Jawando an opportunity to make a statement regarding Montgomery College, and then I want to turn to Dr. Smith to provide us some generic remarks as to your thoughts, and then we'll dive into the detail, Mr. Lopteco. So, Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was able to catch the Dr. Pollard in the hallway and get a quick update. And my understanding is that the committee voted 2-0 to restore the $3.1 million or put it on the reconciliation list as one tranche.
That's right.
And that's my position, so you can make that 3-0, Craig, please. And they provide a great service, and I said this in the public hearing. They came to us with a good budget that was lean already and really responsive to the needs to be fiscally prudent, and we shouldn't be rewarding them by cutting their budget even further. So I'm hopeful that we can work with our other 6 colleagues to fully restore that. And so I just wanted to be on record. I was in my Public Safety Committee, where I just passed my first bill out of committee, 3-0, so I had to be down there for that, related to police accountability. So thank you for your letting me say that.
Absolutely. Dr. Smith.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to come before you and discuss our capital improvement program projects that are critically important to this community. We very much appreciate the long history of support. And I say this every chance I get, because I think the 1 million residents of Montgomery County most don't understand that Montgomery County has a history of forward funding school projects. In virtually every other location in this state, school systems must wait until the state has come forward and provided state money to begin any project. So it's a significant difference, and I think we should always point it out so people understand here what the context is. Certainly the things we're going to discuss today, or that the staff is going to discuss, and I'm going to excuse myself at noon, so if we get to noon and you see me leave, I'm not mad. I'm just have to go do something else. But I think this is all critical work. You know, just if you think in the scale of Montgomery County, with 207 schools, when we open a Clarksburg Elementary School this fall, that it actually takes just a tiny bit over 41 years if you do substantial work or replace or fully renovate 5 schools a year. It takes just over 41 years just to go through the cycle. And 5 schools a year is a big budget if you're doing significant work. And then you have dozens and dozens of schools always lined up for a new roof, a new HVAC system or significant upgrade, for the amenities of the school, for the IT infrastructure as it changes in the world, and for the growing demand and need for instructional spaces that fit the learners and the information of this age, not of the past age. I won't refer to anyone else, but when I went to school, it was a very industrial model, and it was a very limited world, and we sat at desks in rows, and we went to the library to look in the encyclopedia if we wanted to look something up. In other words, you had to go to school to get the information. Now the information is held in almost everyone's hand. So the need to change the instructional program and the space for that instructional program is profound. And so we very much appreciate the support of the county and the opportunity to discuss these projects with you today.
So I don't think there are any generic overview questions at this point, so we can dive right in.
All right, the first set of projects staff wanted to talk about were the Woodward High School reopening and the Northwood High School addition facility upgrades projects. On March 25th, the Board of Education affirmed its support for housing Northwood students at the Woodward facility during the time that the Northwood facility is having its upgrade. At the same time, the Woodward facility would be also improved both before the Northwood students arrive and while they're there, and then after they leave, so that it could become a permanent high school facility as well, with the schools not yet determined how that school will fit within the mix of schools, what programs will be offered, but knowing that that would be the next permanent high school to open in the county. So staff on page 8 did pull out the relevant dates involved in that in terms of when Northwood would move out and move in. These are the same dates that were discussed at the board last fall when they were finalizing the CIP. The difference is now they've affirmed the staging of the Northwood students at Woodward. There was some discussion or whether there were options to move them to a third facility or a different facility, which would provide a bit more flexibility for the Woodward renovation, but they ultimately decided that the Woodward facility was the best location. That does have some subdivision staging policy implications, which Dr. Orland talked about last month, and I've noted those here. It affects the Blair, Northwood, and Walter Johnson clusters. Just to refresh, the Blair cluster would remain in moratorium since the additional space it would gain from Northwood is still not going to occur by the time of the test. So there's no change there. The Northwood cluster, however, and this is something that Dr. Orland talked about, it's currently in moratorium. However, since they would be housed in permanent space, Dr. Orland had said that the council could consider that or direct that the Northwood cluster could come out of moratorium for that reason. So that's something the council will need to discuss further prior to reconciliation, but that is an option the council has, given that they would be moving into what is going to become permanent space.
Let me just actually jump in there and say that again, and that would be in conversation with the board to assure that that was something that were definitive in terms of how it's going to move forward. So certainly, everyone is, no, I shouldn't say everyone. There are folks who are paying very close attention to this whole shifting because it affects a lot of our jurisdictions that are in moratorium right now, that affects the ability for things to move forward. Let me just be very clear, though, as chair of the Education and Culture Committee, while economic development and housing is incredibly important, what we are not going to do is subvert the process that continues to exist to ensure that our schools are not overcrowded. There's a reason why we have these things in place. We understand the challenges and the wear and tear that is then in excess because you have so many more students that are in a facility. We get all of those kinds of things. So I want to assure you that it's not the council's objective to somehow subvert that process. We want to make sure that remains at the core. But if we do know that there are things that are going to be done and signaling that intent, other people may be able to make other decisions that are outside of what you are doing. And so I think that, again, I just want to signal, I don't want you to do something different from what you typically do when it comes to ensuring that our children are in spaces that are appropriate for them and aren't overcrowded, just for the sake of us doing what we need to do in terms of promoting economic development and housing opportunities throughout the county. I think there's a way that we can achieve both in terms of indicating your intent on what it is that you want to do and may need your help in just working with us to try and identify what those decisions may be. Assuming, of course, that the sky doesn't fall and we have a huge recession like we had in the past, which can always change things. Yes, thank you, Councilmember Jawanda, for knocking on wood. That's for sure.
Yeah, and your point's well taken as well with regard to the third cluster affected, the Walter Johnson cluster. This cluster would go into moratorium as well unless the Board of Education were to confirm a minimum number of students that could be reassigned to the Woodward facility. However, in this case, the Northwood students would be at the Woodward facility, and the Board of Education did explicitly discuss that and was not keen on having two schools located there, or certainly not committing to that kind of approach at this time, and that certainly as the Woodward facility becomes available, they would have to go through a boundary change process to figure out if and how many students would come from Walter Johnson. But at this time, we don't have that assumption that there would be capacity for the students assumed at this time, and so the Walter Johnson cluster would also go into moratorium under this scenario. Another issue with regard to these, and I mentioned this earlier, is given this timing, the expenditure string in the project, in both projects, needed to be adjusted to reflect the fact that a significant amount of expenditures, especially in the Northwood project, would be occurring beyond 6 years. This is not changing the scope of those projects, but we did ask MCPS to come back with a more realistic expenditure schedule given the board's affirmation of this approach. And they did provide those numbers to us, and we'll work those numbers into our reconciliation, but it will free up some additional dollars in the latter years of the CIP, which can help with our reconciliation process. And then we're going to just continue through the individual school projects. Let us know if you have any questions as we go through them. Some of them will be quicker than others. One project that was noted in the board's amended CIP request was the removal of the East Silver Spring Elementary School addition project. It was originally intended to relieve overcrowding at that school. However, with the relocation of the Spanish immersion program out of that let me step back. The East Silver Spring addition was intended to relieve Rolling Terrace. Rolling Terrace, with the relocation of the Spanish immersion program from Rolling Terrace to Page Elementary School last fall, that substantially reduced Rolling Terrace's overutilization and brought it below 100%, so the school system noted in its request that this project could be removed.
Any objections or thoughts from my colleagues? No? Okay. Oh, Dr.
Just
Smith.
make one
I'm sorry.
clarification.
Yes, sir.
We actually converted the program at Rolling Terrace from a one-way immersion program to a dual language program. So there's still a dual language Spanish immersion program there, but it benefits all the students in the school. And then we relocated the one-way immersion program, which freed up space.
So you actually grew programs as a whole in the system. Thank you, sir.
The next two projects I want to talk about, McNair Elementary School Edition and the Parkland Middle School Edition. I've paired them for reasons that will become clear. They were both included in the Board of Education's non-recommended reductions for the removal of construction funds for both schools. And I've noted on the charts on pages 9 and 10 the impact of that. So you can see in the approved CIP included the construction dollars, and the board's amended CIP would continue those projects as they were approved. But given the non-recommended reduction target that the committee gave them, they looked to both these schools to remove the construction funds, but leave the planning dollars, so that if dollars were available, obviously if they could be restored this year, that would obviously make the projects whole, but if that was not possible, the projects could still move into the planning process and construction dollars could be added at a future date, perhaps not changing the ultimate schedule, or at least making it easier to add back into the CIP. So both of those projects were sort of treated in a similar way. I've noted on page 10, both projects are well justified based on the individual school overutilization and the cluster utilization, and they should be high priorities if funding is available to restore the construction in both those projects.
Dr. Smith, did you want to weigh in, or any of your colleagues on this particular issue? No? Okay.
And the other thing I wanted to note is both school areas would also go into moratorium. However, we have talked with planning department staff who have not indicated that there are any substantive development projects found when they reviewed what's in their schedules that would be affected by these moratoria. So if there had been, then we'd have a discussion about whether there should be a solution project approach, but in this case, staff does not feel it's necessary. The next three projects I've noted, Highland View Elementary School Addition, Lake Seneca Elementary School Addition, and Thurgood Marshall Elementary School Addition, were all newly requested projects in the board's proposed amended CIP to have planning dollars included. They would have to come back next year for construction dollars. However, as part of the non-recommended reductions, the planning dollars were removed by the board. And I've noted here, all of these schools have utilization issues at the schools themselves. The clusters have varying levels of utilization. It's actually, the utilization in the Seneca Valley clusters is actually fairly low compared to the others. When staff looked at this just purely on those numbers, the Highland View Elementary School seemed to be the highest priority of the three, although we're talking about fairly small amounts of dollars here since it's just planning dollars. But it is, once again, another element of the reductions that were needed in order to meet the committee's target. So once again, it's another set of projects that we'll have to consider as part of reconciliation.
Let me just make a comment here that's kind of interesting in terms of when we're looking at new schools coming online, those actually do have huge impacts when it comes to real estate. And by folks wanting to locate where the new school is, which could then have significant impacts in terms of enrollment. And so I think it's something that I'd like to see us kind of try and see if there's a correlation that's there. My thoughts are with Seneca Valley being a brand new high school that's there, and with it having such capacity, although you hear some of the folks that Council President Navarro referenced before who have things that they'd like to say about Seneca Valley. The reality is that most people look at this as a beautiful brand new school that's going to have an incredible number of different kinds of programs and opportunities that are there, and that's going to encourage more people to want to locate in that particular area. And so from that perspective, then that means that we'll not only see the bumps, you know, it's not just going to be folks who go to the high school, but it's those elementary and middle schools that feed into it as well. And so we'll just need to pay close attention to that, and I think that we should just be cautious in keeping that in eye. Again, there's no recommendation that I have now, but I just think it's something that we might want to just keep our finger on the pulse of, just to make sure that we're being aware.
Right. In fact, the next project I wanted to talk about was the board requested amendment for the Seneca Valley High School. It's an ongoing current RevX project. However, the school system has requested additional dollars to be added to the current construction contract to allow for additional build-out of space for their career and technology program. And they identified several countywide projects that could offset that because they felt this project was urgent enough that they wanted to make sure that it could be accommodated and approved as an FY19 capital budget item. So it's something that would be approved in advance of the rest of the CIP. As a 19 item, but they recognized that they still had to meet their expenditure targets. So there are several other projects we'll talk about separately that would be reduced in order to accommodate this one. Given that level of priority shown by the board, staff does recommend approval of this as an FY19 item to take advantage of the existing construction work occurring at the facility to move forward with that additional scope of work.
Let me give an opportunity. Dr. Smith, did you want to comment on the Seneca Valley and CTE and why the importance of that is there?
Absolutely. We think, we appreciate the recommendation, and we think it's absolutely critical that we take advantage of this really almost miraculous opportunity with the planning that was done for Seneca Valley for the last many years and the new facility at Wheaton Edison, that we can essentially replicate that. And so no student will be more than 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes from any program that he or she wants to engage in this county. And going forward, we're really looking always at a multi-site solution across the county, that we don't build things in only one part of a 500 square mile, 1 million plus resident environment. And this is a really good step forward. And while we're not excited to remove $7.5 million from other needs, we think in this case it way outweighs it.
So let me just say that I think, again, some of the additional funding that we're getting from the state may help to alleviate some of that pressure that's there. And so my hope is that some of that remaining allocation could be re-diverted to some of these initiatives. And so I think that will help us, at least in some of the immediate years. We have a full year CIP that's coming up this fall, so we can adjust and make, decisions. But at least for that first year, for example, if, my hope would be that we build up both the PLAR and HVAC for those first years with that money that comes from the state, whatever additional it is. That would be our first priority, so that we don't lose those kinds of things that are incredibly important. I know that Council President Navarro and Councilmember Jawando, well, you're at large, so you represent all. But where you live, it's one of those things where we all have these aging schools and aging infrastructure in our communities that we know intimately well. Beyond the projects themselves that are slated to be, where it's a major renovation. And so from that perspective, I think that, again, it would behoove us to make sure that we're keeping that in mind as we rebuild those back. But I do agree with you and think that this is a good use of dollars. Council President Navarro.
Thank you. I do want to also express my support. I think also regarding this macro conversation about rethinking high schools, rethinking how we provide access to students throughout the county, rethinking this issue of geography and how everybody is so possessive of where you live, because then it gives you certain access to certain opportunities. This is how we get to that notion of having access everywhere in the county. When we talk about the excellence of Montgomery County Public Schools, it really is about making sure that every school is excellent, and that no matter where you live, that you have that access to those opportunities. And that, will take a while to get there, right? But we have to rethink those models. And I do commend the Board of Education, as well as your leadership, in starting to do that in a very methodical way. It's very exciting to be thinking about, this innovative approach. So I would agree that this should be a priority.
Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we had the beginning of this discussion when you were here before us, I guess a couple months ago, talking about how this is such a priority. Couldn't agree more. Had a great meeting with Dr. Navarro and with the team, the automotive team, and the construction trades folks. And I know you have some issues with needing more land for houses, but we'll talk about that another day. And so I couldn't agree more with my colleagues that as we move to a 21st century model, like you described, all of our students need access to work-based learning. All of them need access to these great career pathway opportunities. And I want to work with you more to not only get them on the bus to get there for 25 minutes, but how can we make sure we offer these types of opportunities to more students in minimizing the transportation challenges, even though this is going to really help, by giving us another hub. I still think we have some work to do as we rebrand CTE and new name and all that. How do we have more of our students having access to these opportunities where they are, and what are there virtual ways we can do it, and and how can we incorporate these comprehensive high schools, because you do have kids having to make a choice that they have to miss a class, right, to get there. So we just have to, I don't have the answer today, but I just want to flag that this is critically important and it's a step in the right direction, but I want to keep thinking about how we can do that longer term.
So I hear full support for that, so.
Right, the next set of projects, Mr. Howard will walk us through.
Excellent.
So actually, if you turn to page 13, the projects on page 12, 12 and the top of page 13 all reflect the amendments that we just discussed.
Right.
So that the bottom of page 13 is building modification and program improvements. And this one, there's not an actual action before the committee, but I did want to walk you through some of the steps and the dollar figures here. Last November, the board had approved a $2.0 million FY19 supplemental appropriation request for this project to purchase and install an average of 2 water bottle filling stations in each MCPS school. The council has not received a formal recommendation on this supplemental from the county executive, which is required prior to consideration and action on a supplemental appropriation. The executive's recommended CIP does show the additional $2 million in FY19 funding as requested by the board, but then shows a corresponding reduction of $2 million in FY19 as part of the affordability reconciliation PDF. And MCPS's non-recommended reduction scenario did not include restoration of this funding. So I just wanted to let everyone know where that initial request from the board stands, and also note that going forward, we do expect that there will be potential requests from the board to address the new 5.0 parts per billion lead and water standard that the committee discussed last week or 2 weeks ago. Time is running together for me.
Let me turn to Ms. Finn Lopez, because I know that the county executive has been adamant in his support for us achieving this 5 parts per billion standard and has said that this is a direction. So are we to expect some sort of transmittal from the county executive?
Sure. So I'll just provide some context in terms of, this $2 million request versus the other lead conversation. Given the testimony that Ms. McGuire gave a couple weeks ago, MCPS had stated that for the cost of about $54,000, that remediation of those water fountains would be able to be addressed within the current year. And also speaking with MCPS staff during the budget process, one of the questions I had was, what is this $2.5 million supplemental request? I was told that this was actually for water bottle refilling stations, that would not necessarily address the lead issue. So this was expressed to me more as an equity issue and not necessarily a student safety issue, which Hucker's proposed legislation in the 5 parts per billion addressed.
I would just add, Mr. Rice, I think I agree completely.
Could you introduce yourself for
sorry.
the record, Dr. Zuckerman? No, it's all
I
right.
do that every time I'm here. Andrew Zuckerman, Chief Operating Officer for MCPS. And I just want to echo that sometimes these two issues of water bottle filling stations and water safety get commingled. The reality is water bottle filling stations for us historically has been actually an environmental issue more than anything else, so that students come to school, use less plastic water bottles, have their water bottles from home, and so it's something that we see more and more. I mean, the college certainly has these county agencies do, but they're not necessarily designed as a water safety function. So I just want to clarify the two. We're still interested in continuing to expand our water bottle filling station work. We will, but we're also really well positioned, as you know, to meet the 5.0 threshold. So we're, I think, overall really good shape in this area.
And I think it's something that also we can address in the full CIP in the fall.
Yes.
Correct.
Going forward, so in next year's CIP, the board can decide what they want to request in terms of the different filling stations and/or the lead remediation efforts.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you.
So the next project on page 14 is school security systems. The committee had a long conversation about this on March 4th as part of the broader briefing on MCPS safety and security, and Dr. Zuckerman went through the different pieces of the CIP request and how that would address the school security in the vestibules for all the remaining schools at MCPS that they haven't already gotten to yet with those construction issues. And so the executive's recommendation supports the board's request for this project, and council staff recommends approval.
Let me turn to Council President Navarro.
Thank you. Mr. Zuckerman, I just want to clarify for the record, so, because I did receive a letter from Belmont Elementary School PTA, and they were really concerned about their vestibule construction issues and et cetera. Can you clarify where that is?
Yeah. Currently, Belmont is not programmed for a security vestibule project without the funding. The vast majority of the funding that we're requesting will go towards construction of vestibules in the schools that are remaining that don't have them. And Belmont is one of those schools, so we're hopeful that we can get this funding and then proceed with the remainder of the county. There's a number of schools that haven't, off the top of my head, 32 are currently still remaining that need this, including Belmont.
And I think this is one of the issues in which we were hoping that this additional school construction money would go towards. It's an immediate need. I know that from our state partners that there was supposed to be additional funding that would flow down for this as well, but we know that spread out amongst all of the thousands of schools throughout the state of Maryland, it's,
Yeah, and we did receive 1.2 million, and that, how many vestibules does that get us?
Pendleton School.
Right. I mean, it to your point, Mr. Rice, it's very minimal. It's appreciated.
No,
but,
certainly.
but it's minimal.
Right. Okay. So again, another item, but I guess the money that's here is enough to cover.
Correct. As it currently stands now,
Right.
MCBS did not include this project in the
Okay.
non-recommended reduction, so, the budget that's before the committee now would include full funding for the school security project.
Okay. And so that would include Belmont. Excellent. Okay.
So turning to page 15, the next project is facility planning, and the request here from the board is for an additional $750,000 to fund the pre-planning of 4 elementary school addition projects and 2 middle school addition projects. The executive supports the board's request, but recommends modifying the funding sources to ensure that strategic planning capacity studies are funded with current revenue. So the table shows kind of the change in GO bonds and current revenue that the executive recommended, and council staff supports the executive's recommendation on this project.
Let me just take a moment to ask a question at this point in terms of, as we talk about facility planning. Mr. Song, you and I have in the past gone back and forth, and I really appreciate you coming around to supporting shelling out some of our buildings where we do have the land space that's available. It's incredibly important to be able to utilize, especially when we know that there's going to be future development or future growth. Is that still a continued practice for us to look at in every one of these scenarios, possibly shelling out buildings to achieve additional capacity if necessary?
Yeah, it's been our standard practice for a number of years now, and we have implemented those where we look at facility planning as a whole campus setting and what is the maximum growth that we can have. About 10 years ago, we started building out shells of the building in anticipation that it'll come a lot quicker when we need those spaces. Since then, the Carderock Elementary Schools and a few other schools has benefited from that, and certainly the Seneca Valley is the same case. When we master plan the whole entire campus, we have master planned the future growth that we were planning to shell out, and that's what's giving us the opportunity to have that lower cost of building the CTE program there.
Excellent. Are you familiar with well, I know you are, the project at Maryville, Sandburg? And so are we looking at shelling out that building as well?
As well.
Okay, and what's the capacity of the shell space at that?
So typical elementary school is going to get up to 740.
Okay.
And Sandburg is going to be, I believe, at 100, 200 spaces, I believe, in that neighborhood. But we have master planned those spaces to be shelled out as well.
Okay. And then in those instances, do you also look at, I'm a big fan of Matsunaga and Longview and what we're able to do there. Dr. Smith, we were there together and had a tremendous time. That model is tremendous, and I really like to see us start building on those in other regions of the county. Are we looking at, with our elementary schools, when we talk about facility planning, it's important for us to start thinking about that just as we do with expansion of CTE, but really looking at other co-location models. Are we looking at these as options when we're looking at these as well. So it could be a shell, but it could also be a co-location project. Are we exploring those opportunities also?
Absolutely. I mean, this is something that state supports very strongly about in terms of co-locations with any special education program with the general elementary school programs. And I think Maryville Sandburg is a classic example, but we're also working on other potential programs such as Stephen Knowles and other programs as well.
That's great to hear. That's
Yeah, I was
Dr.
just gonna say
Zuckerman.
we have Dr. Smith, St. Tilda, and Rock Terrace will be co-located as soon as we open that new facility. And what's really interesting about that is the current principal intern at Tilda Middle School was just appointed by the Board of Ed to be the new principal of Rock Terrace. So they're already planning underway. We just had a meeting about bringing the communities together. So the more we can do that, we're aiming to do that.
And I would just encourage us when we're looking at these in different spaces, incorporating our local governments as well and incorporating them. If it's a Maryville and incorporating the city of Rockville, and I see I see Beryl Feinberg right behind us giving thumbs up. But because this is something that's a win-win for all of us. It really is. And these are shining examples. And again, this is just me saying, you guys have done a great job in terms of, we didn't force you to do this or ask you to do this. You did this on your own volition, and we've seen the great results, and we want to see that replicated. So the more you can continue and encourage that to be done, the better it's going to be for all of us. So thank you for your great work in that. Thank you.
All right, on the bottom of page 15, the Improve Safe Access to Schools project, there's just a technical modification to reflect the actual expenditures in the project. And the last three projects on pages 16 and 17 are all projects where MCPS has included these as part of their non-recommended reductions. So the status of what actually happens with them we'll see at reconciliation what can be potentially restored as part of these reductions. For the outdoor play space maintenance project, MCPS had requested, or the Board of Ed had requested an additional $2.6 million in total funding for this project. The request would continue to fund the play space enhancements at different elementary schools while also providing funding for the maintenance and replacement of natural grass and artificial turf high school athletic fields. The non-recommended reductions remove that $2.6 million additional request, and so the project would revert back to the funding level that was approved as part of the prior CIP. I did include an update on the 5 different schools that were initially selected for this project. Rolling Terrace is complete. Tacoma Park is mostly complete with some grass still to be installed this summer. Chevy Chase and Sligo Creek are estimated to be completed this month with additional grass installation in July. And then Flora Singer is estimated to have to be fully complete in July. And Mr. Adams did provide me with some photos of the new projects, and I've just yesterday, so I'm going to put those together and share them with all council members because I know there's been a lot of interest in this project, both from council and from constituents as well.
Let me just say that that's also equally impressive regarding all of the rain that we've had and the challenges for us to be able to keep those in line as they've been, and keep these on task when it comes to the delivery dates is pretty impressive. It really, really is. So, great job.
So with the major capital projects project, the non-recommended reduction MCPS included here was essentially to move $5 million for this project outside of the 6-year CIP timeframe. And it would adjust some of the funding levels in fiscal years 21 through 24. And then the last one is the Blair G. Ewing Center relocation. The non-recommended reduction submitted by MCPS in this project would remove $10.2 million in expenditures, leaving only the $453,000 that were programmed for FY20. And again, this is one during reconciliation we'll see what we're able to restore for this project.
Sure. And then again, we have another bite at the apple come our full CIP where we'll be able to take a look at all of these things as well and see if, even if we can't restore a tremendous amount of it, there's still other things that we may be able to do when we come to next year as well.
One other thing I wanted to mention is the executive has recommended a number of funding switches, and for purposes of reconciliation, it's easiest for us to assume those up front and then make changes from that as the baseline. So inherent in the numbers here is staff's assumption that we move forward with those funding switches at this time and then make everything work in May.
Yes, and that would be, before Councilmember Duando left, he said that he was in agreement, so we're all in agreement with that. All right. Dr. Zuckerman.
Mr. Rice, just one last thing. We were just touching base on just specifically where we are in the security vestibule project that Councilmember Navarro asked us about. So after this summer, we will have actually 18 remaining. So we were doing more during this year, and so I appreciate just the update from our staff. So I just wanted to clarify for the record that at the end of this summer, we'll have 18 remaining, and the money in here will go towards that, and Belmont is still one of those remaining schools.
That will be.
That's correct.
That will be addressed. Okay.
Yep.
And do we have an estimated time frame of how long those will take? Will those be done by the end of the year, by spring of next year?
The remaining 18?
The remaining 18.
Those will take place over the course of the CIP. We have to do the feasibility studies, scope them out, do the design for them. So they won't all be done at once. There's a staging process and the expenditure schedule for that. So
I know some of them are much more complicated than others and require a lot of movement and shifting of space, so I certainly understand.
And I will say, I mean, just having been to a number of schools recently, when you go, you can see the new ones, I mean, when you go in and just how they're constructed, but you're absolutely right. White Oak, for example, took us a very long time to do because of just where the main office was, the entrance was. You're absolutely right.
All right, well, thank you very much. This was very informative and good to hear that we're making progress in terms of trying to fit all these things in. I really want to thank council staff as well as all of you for continuing to be great partners, and we'll be figuring this out as a part of the leadership of Council President Navarro in our reconciliation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys. We're adjourned.